order to launch the field of mimetic studies and bring Homo mimeticus to an end, I thought it would be good to return to the starting place of the first theories of Homo mimeticus. We mentioned in the previous episode that philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle set the foundations for a transdisciplinary theory of Homo mimeticus that needs to be rethought today from an immanent, relational, and embodied perspective. But why is that important? Why is it important to return to this ancient tradition in order to propose what we've been calling a mimetic turn? Well, genealogy is not interested in history for antiquarian reasons that simply concern the past. On the contrary, it looks back to the past in order to find inspiration to think about the present. We mentioned Athena, the goddess of wisdom, as an important figure that inspired a generation of philosophers that aspired to wisdom. What we should add is that philosophers were also in touch with another divinity that was very important here in Athens, in addition to Athena, obviously Zeus, Poseidon, and many others. And that divinity is the god Dionysus, twice born. Dionysus plays a key role for the Homo mimeticus project because he was the god of wine and sex, as it often emphasized, but also the god of the theater. And here on the Acropolis, on the southern side of the Acropolis, we have the famous great theater of Dionysus. This is literally the first theater. You see behind me the Theatron, the place of viewing. So the theater would be the place where people would be sitting in order to watch the spectacle. And in front is the orchestra, which originally was planned in order to stage ritual dances in honor of Dionysus, with music and dance. And that's the origin of mimesis, of mimos, that is, these dramatic impersonations that are enacted in body and dance and that generate an emotional contagion to the audience sitting on the theatron, a Dionysian mimesis that we are seeking to recuperate by the Homo mimeticus project. In this context, we are better placed to see, and perhaps to feel as well, that a lot of concepts that emerged out of the Homo mimeticus project originate here, from the theater of Dionysus behind us. Take the concept of Pathos, for instance, or Dionysian Pathos, the idea that through ritual impersonations enacted and dramatized in music, a certain affect spreads from self to other, contaminating the audience, generating a confusion of identity that blurs the boundaries between self and other, generating what Nietzsche calls a phantom of the ego. This mimetic pathos, this Dionysian pathos, is indeed at the origins of the theatrical experience that started in the 6th century before Christ, or before, behind me. And that's why I privilege the concept of mimetic pathos and not, let's say, mimetic affect or mimetic desire in order to start this new theory of Homo mimeticus. But notice as well that if Dionysian pathos is dramatized and embodied, it can also be viewed from a critical distance, from a theatrical distance, that is, from the space of viewing of the theatron. Hence, this other Nietzschean concept of pathos of distance equally originates here from the interplay, agon, and tension between a Dionysian mimesis or Dionysian pathos on the one hand, and a theatrical distance on the other, indicating for us that it's possible to take critical distance from the contaminating pathos of Dionysian forms of mimetic intoxications that are at play today by new media especially. So we see 2 or 3 removes in the digital age that these foundational concepts of mimetic pathos, Apollonian distance, pathos of distance, and the phantom of egos that are generated as mimetic affects are disseminated by new media can indeed be traced back to the origins of mimetic theory in order to reload a new theory of Homo mimeticus to launch the field of mimetic studies in the 21st century. Now, the theory of Homo mimeticus has been emphasized in the fact that the concept of mimesis comes from mimos, which means both actor and performance. And here, at the great theater of Dionysus, this oral mythic tradition has been mentioned, dramatized, or rather staged, a number of mythic figures, both divine and human, that were not simply represented on the theater, but were impersonated by actors on the stage. Now, the Athenians went to the theater in order to see representations of the plays by Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles, staging heroes like Oedipus, Medea, but also Dionysus himself in Euripides the Bacchae, for instance. But these were not only representations seen from a distance. On the contrary, the actors on the stage were impersonating, miming, or dramatizing these mythic figures by a notion of mimesis that has to do with drama, which is acted out. As Nietzsche famously noted in his first book on the birth of tragedy, there are 2 forms of mimesis at play, or that give birth to tragedy. One is an Apollonian visual mimesis that can be seen from a distance, and that's the dominant view of mimesis as representation, we're moving beyond. But the other one, more ancient, archaic, and more fundamental, is a Dionysian mimesis that has to do with rituals of intoxication that took possession of the subject and dispossessed it of its proper ego. For Nietzsche, in Nietzsche's thesis, it is the interplay, he says the marriage, but it's actually the interplay of this Apollonian and Dionysian mimesis that gave birth to ancient tragedy. Why is it important for the field of new mimetic studies? Because we live in a world of digital simulations that are not simply seen from an Apollonian distance. On the contrary, the simulations affect us and infect us on a visceral, embodied, and affective register, on the register of what I call Dionysian pathos. This is why the theory of Homo mimeticus we propose starts from the realization that not only desire, but all affects, what I call pathos or mimetic pathos, are contagious. And if they were contagious in ancient Greece and they spread among the audience on the theater, a theater that held over 17,000 people, we live now in a digital age in which this Dionysian affect spread contagiously in the digital sphere, reaching millions of people. Now, this is one of the reasons why we've been proposing a number of new concepts like mimetic pathos, but also the notion of distance, the importance of putting oneself at a critical distance from mimetic pathos, in order to diagnose mimetic pathologies that are now widespread in the 21st century and that require a new theory of imitation in order to be properly diagnosed. In the end, here in Athens, Socrates reminded his fellow Athenians that what is important in life, not only for philosophers, is to know oneself. Noti seuton. This was the famous inscription on the temple at Delphi that Socrates echoed and repeated. The Homo mimeticus project has been arguing that in order to know oneself, this cannot be done in isolation. We need to engage in dialogues with others, because self-knowledge is something that emerges from a relation of communication. Why is it important to go back to theories of mimesis today? because imitation or mimesis not only informs or more often misinforms new generations, but also forms and transforms subjectivity. So if you want to take hold of the tools, not only to know ourselves, but also to form and transform ourselves, then we need to come to terms with this ancient concept of mimesis that the Homo Mimeticus has been recuperating.